Have you ever wondered why a man becomes most restless when a woman finally stops speaking? Why her silence, once filled with warmth and laughter, now haunts him more than her words ever did? There is something ancient in this, something that belongs not to the surface world of relationships, but to the deeper currents of the psyche, where desire and ego wage their quiet wars beneath the threshold of awareness. For centuries, men have mistaken a woman's quiet for absence. They think that if she does not explain, justify, or argue, she must have nothing left to say. But the truth, as Jung understood, is far more unsettling. Her silence is not emptiness, it is presence, concentrated. It is the voice of the unconscious speaking in symbols rather than sentences, and distance rather than noise. A woman who grows silent is not lost, she has simply returned to the temple within herself, where words are no longer needed. The feminine silence is not passive. It is an act of reclamation. It is the moment she steps out of the masculine field of logic and control, the endless why and how, and enters the stillness where intuition reigns. To a man still enslaved by his ego, this silence feels like rejection, even punishment. But to the awakened man, it is an invitation to listen differently, to feel what cannot be spoken. Carl Jung once said that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Yet most men resist that transformation. When faced with a woman's silence, they project onto it, imagining betrayal, indifference, or pride, anything that allows them to avoid confronting their own shadow. For silence, especially feminine silence, reflects the truth back to them like a still pool, the truth of their insecurity, their need to be needed, their hunger to dominate what they cannot understand. A woman's silence unmasks the man who cannot bear to see himself. It strips away his illusions of control. The chatter stops, and suddenly he must sit with the sound of his own thoughts, unedited, unflattering, raw. What terrifies him is not her quiet but his own echo within it. That echo reveals the boy still searching for validation, the lover still chasing possession rather than connection. You see, when a woman chooses silence, she steps into the archetype of the high priestess, the keeper of secrets, the guardian of thresholds. Her quiet becomes sacred ground, a psychic boundary drawn not in anger but in knowing. She no longer tries to make him understand. She no longer bleeds energy into explanation. She knows that what he refuses to see cannot be taught by words. Only the absence of her voice can reveal the depth of his blindness. The paradox is that this silence, though invisible, exerts the most magnetic pull. A man feels it even from afar. It lives inside his chest as restlessness, as longing without a name. He checks his phone, replays old messages, revisits memories, not realizing that he is chasing the echo of her energy, not her body. The more he reaches outward, the further she drifts into herself. Because her silence is not a strategy, it is a natural evolution. It is the point in every woman's journey where emotional exhaustion transforms into spiritual sovereignty. And yet, how often does society misread this? How often do we call a woman cold when she has simply become wise? Her detachment is not cruelty, it is discernment. She has learned that not every conflict deserves her presence, not every plea deserves an answer. She has discovered that in the stillness of her own being lies a power that cannot be manipulated. That is why the man grows uneasy. His ego thrives on reaction, on sound, on motion. Silence starves it. Jung would say this is where the anima and animus begin their silent dialogue. Her inner masculine, once externalized in the man she loved, now turns inward. She integrates it, logic without losing softness, strength without losing grace. The man, if he dares, must do the same with his inner feminine. He must learn to feel without fleeing, to listen without fixing. Only then can silence become communion rather than distance. But few dare. Most retreat into the comfort of distraction, mistaking noise for life. They seek another woman to fill the quiet, not realizing that what they are running from is not her, it is themselves. And so, the cycle repeats, conversation without connection, desire without depth, closeness without consciousness. Until one day, the silence returns again, this time from another woman, another mirror. And again, it asks the same question: will you face yourself, or will you flee? When a woman's silence speaks louder than his desire, it is not because she has ceased to care. It is because she has transcended the level at which care must be proven. She no longer competes with his distractions, his ego, or his wounds. She becomes untouchable, not in arrogance, but in essence. For what is untouchable cannot be owned. It can only be met if one has the courage to meet themselves first. He will call it distance, but it is not distance. It is gravity, the inward pull of a woman reclaiming her essence. While he paces, replaying the last words she spoke, she is descending into the quiet corridors of her own psyche. Down there, beneath the noise of desire and disappointment, she rediscovers what he could never touch, the self that exists before being chosen, before being loved, before being seen. In Jungian terms, this is the moment the anima withdraws her projection. What she once saw in him, strength, safety, meaning, she now sees as reflections of her own disowned parts. He was a mirror, not a home. And as the mirror fades, she realizes that she has been looking into her own unconscious all along. That is the shock of awakening, the moment she recognizes that the man she thought she lost was never truly hers. He was an image built upon her longing. The silence, then, is the sound of the illusion collapsing. To a man who lives on surface instincts, this feels like cruelty. But the feminine silence is never about punishment, it is about integration. She has stopped externalizing her energy into words that go unheard. She no longer negotiates for understanding, because she has seen that true connection cannot arise from convincing. It can only arise from presence, from the rare meeting of two awakened souls who have met themselves first. When a woman no longer explains herself, it terrifies the man who depended on her emotional labor. He will say she has changed, grown cold, become distant. But her stillness is not frost, it is clarity. The kind of clarity that emerges after years of chaos, the kind that feels like standing in a cathedral after the bells have stopped ringing. There is no anger left, only awareness. You can almost see him begin to spiral. Without her emotional feedback, his ego loses its supply. Her silence becomes a mirror where he must face what he has always avoided, his inability to sit with discomfort. Every message left unanswered amplifies his fear of insignificance. He begins to grasp that her energy, not her attention, not her words, but her energy, was the real nourishment. Now that she has withdrawn it, he feels the famine of his own emptiness. This is how the feminine teaches without teaching. She does not lecture or prove. She embodies the lesson. She becomes the quiet force of nature that reveals what happens when a man confuses possession for intimacy. He wanted control, she offered connection. He wanted certainty, she offered depth. But depth requires descent into his own vulnerability, his own unmet needs. And descent is something the ego resists until it has no other choice. In the mythology of the psyche, silence is the threshold. It is the place where the old self begins to dissolve and something new demands to be born. A woman who enters this space is performing shadow work, whether she knows the term or not. She is facing the parts of herself that once believed love required noise, the explaining, the proving, the pleasing. She begins to realize that every time she argued for her worth, she unknowingly denied it. Now she no longer argues. She simply embodies. And as she embodies, something extraordinary happens. The same qualities that once made her seem too much, her intensity, her insight, her emotional precision, now become her magnetism. Because true magnetism arises not from effort, but from alignment. Her silence hums with coherence, it speaks the language of energy, not persuasion. And energy does not lie. Meanwhile, he stands on the edge of his own abyss. For the first time, he feels what she once felt, the ache of disconnection, the craving for emotional presence. But his masculine conditioning has taught him to hide it, to turn pain into pride. So he scrolls through distractions, measuring her absence by the noise he creates. What he doesn't realize is that the noise cannot drown the silence, it only makes it louder. Jung wrote that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Her silence is that confrontation. It is the unconscious rising to the surface, demanding honesty. For the man, it feels like fate, an inexplicable loss, a punishment he doesn't understand. For the woman, it feels like liberation, the moment she stops waiting to be seen and starts seeing herself. And in that moment, she begins to remember who she was before he defined her. The one who walked through the world with her own rhythm, her own sacred pace. The one who could feel deeply without drowning. Her silence is not the end of love, it is the end of illusion. The death of dependency, and the rebirth of dignity. For in every woman's silence lies the echo of her awakening, a soundless revolution, a calm so complete that it disarms the noise of the entire world. It is not an escape from love, but a return to it, love stripped of its need to be earned, proven, or performed. Love, as it exists in the stillness of the soul. When a woman reaches this point, she no longer operates from the wounded feminine, the part that fears abandonment, overexplains, and attaches to potential. Instead, she becomes the embodiment of the sacred feminine, receptive, intuitive, and quietly powerful. She understands that silence is not a wall, it is a mirror for truth. In that mirror, she sees both the man's struggle and her own evolution reflected back. Her stillness begins to draw out the hidden dynamics of his psyche. Without words, she becomes the stage upon which his shadow performs. The projection begins. He accuses her of being distant, manipulative, too calm. He senses her energy slipping beyond his grasp, and it threatens the illusion of control his ego depends upon. But her silence doesn't rise to meet his accusations, it absorbs them. It transforms them into understanding. Jung described this process as the confrontation with the shadow, the meeting with all that the ego has rejected. For a man, a woman's silence can feel like abandonment, but what it truly reveals is his inner child, desperate for validation. The boy within him, who once learned that affection must be earned, now finds himself before a woman who no longer rewards the performance. Her quiet forces him to face his own emptiness, and in doing so, offers him the first real chance for growth. Yet few men recognize this as an invitation. They see it as rejection because they have been conditioned to believe that love must always sound like agreement or reassurance. But real love, mature, conscious love, often arrives as challenge. And the silence of a woman who has awakened is one of the deepest challenges a man can encounter. It is the test of whether his love was about control or connection, possession or presence. The irony is that the same silence he fears could have saved him, if only he knew how to listen. In that quiet lies everything he claims to want: peace, understanding, authenticity. But to access it, he must surrender his attachment to dominance. He must allow himself to be taught not through logic, but through resonance. This is where the masculine either breaks open or breaks down. Meanwhile, she continues her inward journey. Her silence is not static, it is creative. Beneath it, there is movement, the subtle reorganization of her psyche, the rebalancing of her inner masculine and feminine. Her animus, once projected onto the man she loved, begins to integrate. She learns to protect herself without closing, to stand firm without fighting. The authority she once sought from others now rises within her like a steady flame. She becomes the woman who walks through the world without announcing her worth, because her energy already declares it. She speaks less, but everything she says carries weight. Her presence becomes a kind of serenity that unsettles the ungrounded and attracts the conscious. This is the paradox of feminine power: it is invisible yet undeniable. And for the man who once mistook her silence for surrender, the truth begins to dawn slowly, painfully. He starts to feel her absence in the smallest moments, in the quiet before sleep, in the laughter that now sounds hollow, in the new conversations that never touch the same depth. He realizes that what he missed was never her words, but the reflection of his better self that lived in her presence. It is then that regret sets in, not the shallow regret of losing possession, but the existential regret of realizing he was loved by someone who could have expanded him, and he chose comfort instead. Her silence now stands as a monument to everything he could have become. It echoes with the lessons he refused to learn. But for the woman, regret does not exist. Her silence has alchemized it into wisdom. She understands now that not all connections are meant to last, some are meant to awaken. And awakenings are rarely gentle. They tear apart illusions so that truth can enter. She no longer mourns what was lost, because she knows it was never truly hers, it was borrowed for her evolution. This is the spiritual essence of feminine detachment. It is not coldness, but clarity. She can still feel, but she no longer clings. She can still love, but without needing to be chosen. Her silence becomes her sanctuary, a place where she can hear the whisper of her own intuition louder than the noise of the world. The woman who reaches this point becomes a force of equilibrium. Her energy no longer reacts, it responds. She has stopped trying to fix what resists transformation. Instead, she aligns herself with what resonates. And that alignment creates a vibration that calls forth only those who are ready to meet her at that depth. Her silence, once misunderstood as retreat, has become revelation. It speaks to men, to the world, and to the unconscious itself. I am whole, even when unseen. I am powerful, even when quiet. And in this revelation, the power dynamics that once defined her relationships begin to dissolve. She is no longer the mirror for a man's projection, she is the mirror for his awakening. Her quiet is no longer a void to be filled, it is a threshold to be crossed. And as she stands at that threshold, something profound shifts in the fabric of her being. Her silence no longer belongs to pain, it belongs to peace. It is not the absence of expression, but the fullness of presence. In this state, she no longer resists the masculine, nor seeks to prove herself to it. She simply is. She has entered what Jung called the individuation process, the sacred unfolding of becoming whole within oneself. In this wholeness, the polarity between her and him begins to change. The dance that once revolved around validation and reaction now dissolves into something quieter, more sacred. She no longer needs to be understood to be at peace. And that is what makes her truly magnetic, not in the superficial sense of charm, but in the archetypal sense of mystery. There is a kind of quiet woman who carries storms inside her, yet her surface remains still. She has faced her shadows, the fear of being unseen, the compulsion to please, the ache of abandonment, and has found gold within them. That gold is her consciousness. It glows from her eyes, it hums beneath her words, it lingers in her silence. The man who meets her now can feel it instantly, that she is not the same woman he once knew. And this realization unsettles him. Because what he once recognized as softness now feels like sovereignty. Her energy no longer bends to accommodate his insecurities. She can love him without losing herself, and that terrifies a man who has only known power through control. He begins to sense that her silence is not withdrawal, but discernment, that she sees through him with a clarity he cannot yet bear. In the Jungian view, this moment marks the man's potential turning point. Confronted with her silence, he stands before his own shadow. All that he has repressed, his fear of failure, his hunger for validation, his inability to truly feel, begins to surface. The woman's silence acts as a mirror, forcing him to look at the part of himself that he has long denied. If he runs from it, he repeats the same pattern with another woman, another mirror. But if he faces it, he begins his own process of individuation, his own path toward wholeness. Meanwhile, she moves through her world differently now. The things that once consumed her, unanswered messages, unreciprocated affection, the need for closure, have lost their weight. She doesn't chase resolution because she understands that not every story is meant to be finished aloud. Some endings happen in silence, and the private moment a woman decides her peace is worth more than being understood. Her silence becomes her language of faith. Faith in herself. Faith that what is meant for her will recognize her not through words, but through energy, through resonance. And because she no longer speaks from emptiness, her words, when they do come, carry power. They are not reactions, they are revelations. In her presence, men begin to feel something they cannot name. It is both unsettling and magnetic, the sensation of being seen without performance. Some will retreat, unable to face themselves in her mirror. Others, the ones who have begun their own shadow work, will stay. They will not try to break her silence, they will learn to honor it. For they understand now that silence is not distance, it is depth. As this energy settles, a new kind of relationship becomes possible, one not built on egoic need but on mutual awareness. In that sacred balance, both the masculine and feminine evolve. The man learns that presence is greater than persuasion. The woman learns that surrender is not weakness but wisdom. And together, they form what Jung called the conjunction, the mystical union of opposites, not in dominance, but in wholeness. But even if he never reaches her again, she does not ache. Her love no longer depends on outcome. She can hold memory without longing, tenderness without attachment. Her silence has purified her love, turned it from desire into devotion, from wanting into understanding. That is the mark of an awakened woman. She loves without needing to be chosen, and in doing so, becomes unforgettable. When she walks through the world now, her presence feels like music beneath the noise, a reminder that power need not shout to be heard. She knows that every man who once misunderstood her silence will, one day, remember it, not as rejection, but as reflection. The moment he realizes her silence was the first honest thing he had ever been given. For she has learned what few ever do: silence is not the end of communication. It is the highest form of it, the language of souls who no longer need to prove their worth through sound. And that is why her silence speaks louder than his desire. It does not demand, it simply is. In that sacred stillness, she has become the woman who no longer waits, no longer explains, no longer reaches. She knows that what is real will always find her, not through words, not through promises, but through presence. And so she smiles, serene and unshaken, as the world still tries to decipher what cannot be defined. The woman who understands her own silence has nothing left to chase. She has remembered that she was never meant to be noise in someone else's story. She was meant to be the quiet that teaches them to listen. The woman who understands her value does not pursue, she chooses.